Hello, David here, and the project for today is replacing the coolant on a 2018 Toyota RAV4. This is a gasoline engine model. And before I get started, I'm going to give a little talk about coolants and cooling systems. So if you're an experienced mechanic, you probably want to fast forward onto the meat of the video. Coolant is pretty much used in liquid-cooled engines. There are a lot of coolants available. There's aftermarket coolants. I prefer to use the Toyota brand coolant because the chemicals in there are specifically engineered to work with the Toyota engines, and that's one thing I want to talk about. Is the coolant is designed not just to be an antifreeze in the winter to keep the coolant from freezing and cracking the block. It's also a coolant in the summer to keep the engine running cool. So it's running in a closed system. Their radiator has a cap on it to pressurize it because engineers have discovered when you pressurize the coolant it raises the boiling point, and because liquids expand when they're hot and contract when they're cold, there's an expansion tank that runs off the radiator. So when the coolant expands, it runs into the expansion tank, and the expansion tank holds the coolant until the engine cools off, and then when the coolant contracts, a vacuum is created and it sucks that coolant out of the expansion tank back in the radiator. So that keeps the radiator full. It keeps any air bubbles from happening, and air bubbles, as we know, create pockets of heat where the engine could overheat, or if you have an air pocket big enough, you won't get heat out of your heater core when you want to heat the cabin. And the third important fact about coolant that most people aren't aware of is the coolant acts as a protection against corrosion of the head gasket. The head gasket's made out of steel. The engine blocks are usually made out of aluminum. That difference in metals creates an electronic point of corrosion where the head gasket corrodes, and the manufacturers will tell you to change your coolant every 10 years, but I do it every 5 just to protect that head gasket because the coolant breaks down. I think it gets acidic after spending years in the car, and it's just not useful as a corrosion inhibitor any longer. If you keep your car for 7 to 10 years, it's not going to matter, but I always keep my cars for 20 years or longer. My last car lasted 25 years, and by using a steady routine of maintenance, I've been able to BB my cars along. So I'm going to be using the Toyota. It's a 50-50 pre-diluted mix. In the past, I used to drain all the coolant out of the engine, then I would flush fresh water through there. I had a flushing tee, and I'd run the engine and have the garden hose running fresh water through the engine, and then I drain that out. But you don't get it all out. So I was concerned about using a 50-50 mix. I always used a 100% concentrate, and I knew that if let's say the engine held 2 gallons of coolant, I would drain out the water, seal it, and I would put in a gallon of coolant, and then I would just top it off with water, knowing that a 2-gallon capacity, when filled with 1 gallon of coolant, you add enough water to fill it up. There's a 1 gallon of water, and you're at a 50-50 mix. 50-50 mix is the most optimal mix you can get for antifreeze protection and summer coolant to stop boil over. So I don't think this Toyota coolant is even available as a concentrate, so I'm not going to be flushing the system with water. I'm just going to drain it. Then I'm going to fill it up with the 50-50 mix. I don't want to take the chance of flushing it with water, not getting all the water out, and then putting the 50-50 mix in. If there's water in there, I'm going to have less than a 50-50 dilution of coolant, if that makes any sense. You'll see a lot of videos where the video maker says to jack up the car and take the wheels off and then take the splash guards off, and I don't want to do it. It's extra work, and I think I could get by without doing it. And also I want to know, I don't know the answer to this, but if you jack up the car and then drain it, are you going to get all the water out? So I'd rather drain the radiator with the car level. So I think if you have long arms, you could reach down to the petcock, which is right down the driver's side of the car. That yellow knob right there, that's a petcock. You could drain it. There is a splash guard right underneath there, but I'm going to run a hose. I've got this 5/16 of an inch inside diameter hose. I'm going to run it off the end of the petcock. Got a little feature on there where you could fit a hose on there. Then I'm going to run it out past the splash guard towards the rear of the car. Run it about 1.5 feet or so into my drain pan. And to permit the coolant to drain completely, I'm going to take the cap off of here to let some air in as the fluid's going out. Never remove the cap when the engine is hot. Always do it on a cold engine. Likewise, drain the coolant when the engine is cool as well. You might find this too tight, and you might need a pliers to loosen it. And remember, this thing's made out of plastic, so you don't want to be going grill on it. And when you tighten it, just get it snug. If you take this out all the way, all this coolant's going to be gushing out straight out of where this yellow plug is going. The coolant is drained, and I closed the petcock, and I cleaned up any spills. Supposedly antifreeze is bad for your skin and bad for the paint. I've got my spill-free funnel attached, and it doesn't need any attachments. The funnel just happens to fit snugly into the expansion tank. Let's start adding the coolant. Just take your time here. Let it settle into the system. Let all the air bubbles come up. Squeeze the radiator hoses to squeeze out any air bubbles. Air bubbles are bad and you don't want any. I think I must have taken about 1.5 gallons out of there, so I assume it's going to take about 1.5 gallons. After I let it settle down, then I'll start the motor. It's real important to squeeze those radiator hoses to get that air out of there. Some engines have a little bleed screw where you open up the screw and let the air bleed out. It's usually on the uppermost portion of the cooling system. I don't think this engine has one. This is a Toyota 2AR FE 4-cylinder engine. And if you know if they have one, let me know where it's at. I'd like to know for my next coolant change. And if you know if there's a drain on the engine block to drain all the coolant out of the engine cooling jacket, I would like to know where that is as well, if it has one. Discard of your old coolant responsibly. Leaving it out in open containers will attract kids and pets because it has a sweet odor and it tastes sweet as well. But it's a deadly toxic. It'll kill them with a horrible death. Start the engine and turn the heat up on high to let that coolant circulate into the heater core. And run the engine until it warms up to operating temperature, and you'll know when the radiator fan kicks on. And make sure you top off the coolant because there's going to be a coolant level drop on the overflow tank. As you can see, it just went down a little bit. What we want to do is when the engine gets up to operating temperature, the thermostat's going to open up and it's going to allow a full circulation of the coolant. Don't forget to update your maintenance log. It's been running at operating temperature for the last 10 minutes and the fans did not cycle on. I checked the heat coming out of the heater inside the cabin and there is hot air coming out of there. So that's a good thing. That means I got most of the air bled out of the system. If you're not getting heat out of your system, you have to bleed the air out of there by squeezing the hoses or put the cap on the expansion tank and drive around, let it cool down completely, take the cap off and top it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cap on the expansion tank, let it cool down, then I'll check the level. I'll add some if I need to. If you notice in the expansion tank the level did not go down. And then after it cools down and I check it, I'm going to take it for a drive it around for about 20 minutes or so, bring it back, let that cool down, and then I'll check the level again. Drove it around for an hour, then I let it cool off, and the level did not get any lower. So I'm pretty sure I got all the air out of the system. Otherwise, the engine would have sucked in the rest of the coolant by vacuum. Nothing filled in. The fill line is right there. It's only a 1/4 of an inch above the fill line. I'm not going to worry about it overflowing. It can't explode because this little tube here is the escape for any expanding fluid that fills up the reservoir. So I think I'm good. And that's going to be it for this project. I want to thank you guys and gals for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more great videos from David GPO. Hey, you know something? I'm mistaken. That's not the fill line, that's the low line. So I'm above the low line. The fill line is right there by my finger. I don't know if you could see it. I have to get a low perspective for that. It's right up there. So I think I'm okay. Put that blue tape there to mark the level, just in case it moved. Just there temporarily.